What's up, everybody? Hello, welcome in. See, some of you guys have your pencils ready. Surprise, I'm working in a new program today. Trying something new today. So, welcome in, everybody. Today we're going to be drawing bodies, and I think that this is a popular subject because we got a lot of inquiries about, lots of pain when it comes to drawing bodies. But figure drawing is what I specialize in. So I'm really excited to draw with you guys today. And since you guys are here live, you can ask me anything. And I will try to answer as many questions as possible. But this stream is going to be for beginners, except when we get into foreshortening. But I'm going to try to keep that pretty simple. Welcome in, Henry, first to come in. Welcome. Welcome in, Lotus and Ian and Quinn and our lovely mod Joanne. Hello, Vavara and Broken Wing Zeal, one of our patrons. Welcome in. Oh. And Lycan Arts, nice to see you. All right, lovely people. I am using Rebel, and it's actually Rebel 7, and it's supposed to be, like, I just started using it. I literally started using it 2 days ago. Maybe, not even. So I'm going to be stumbling through this. I thought I would, either draw with you guys and try something new, but this is a program that's kind of designed to look a lot like traditional, and yeah, it's pretty easy to use so far. I'm just hoping that that my computer can handle it. So let me know if it gets a little bit laggy. All right. Since character design is your favorite thing, have you ever drawn non-human characters as humans? Yes, absolutely. Yeah, I am using Rebel and just kind of giving it a try and just kind of seeing how it compares to when I draw really using chalk, which is my preferred medium. But yeah. So let's just see here. I'm stumbling through this too, so just bear with me here. So before we get started, if you are new to the channel, we are Winged Canvas, and our mission is to make art education easily accessible to everyone. So tune in live for free lessons every weekend, Saturday and Sunday at 3 p.m. Eastern Time. And good news, our team was just planning our streams for next year, and so hopefully we'll be testing out some streams during weeknights as well, so that might be fun for our European and Asian audiences. And if you didn't know, our growing community is filled with art nerds, and we art nerds have to stick together. So if you're an art nerd too, check out the links in our social media and our website for our classes, where you can get critique, guidance, and encouragement from our instructors, because we're not just a YouTube channel, we are a school of illustration. And I'd like to personally thank all of our amazing patrons. Shout out to all of you in the chat, so Vin and Quinn, and Lycan Arts, I think you're in here too, and Broken Wing Zeal. Thank you guys so much, and if I missed any of you, thank you for supporting our channel, and thank you for being part of our member community. And our membership actually is the best way that you can learn, the most flexible, I shouldn't say the best way, but it's probably like one of the most flexible ways and the most affordable ways, because you can get exclusive chats with our creators and critiques, both written and live on Discord, as well as class recordings, digital art files from our streams, and discounts on our live programs, which have a limited amount of spots. So definitely consider becoming a member and joining our Patreon for those cool perks. All right. Today's stream is sponsored by XP Pen. Thank you so much for sponsoring our stream. They have an awesome selection of digital art tablets, both for beginners and advanced artists. So I use an XP Pen. I have an Artist Pro, Artist 15.6 Pro. I love it. It's like a second monitor, really, really useful. And I use it for all kinds of things outside of art. So if you're looking for an affordable and reliable tablet, go browse their store. You can find the link in the description of our video. Okay, so without further ado, let's look at some of the things that people have said that frustrates them the most. I put out a poll. It was only a day ago. It should have been 2 days ago, but anyway. What frustrates you the most when it comes to drawing bodies? And most people said getting the proportions right. So that actually surprised me because I thought that, our channel has a lot of stuff that is kind of more intermediate level. But it goes to show that getting proportions right is one of those things that is kind of like, you could be really good at shading, you could be pretty good at drawing dynamic poses, but if you can't get the proportions right, then your drawings are just not gonna be good to look at. Or sometimes you might draw like a male character but they look female, or you draw like a female character but they look like a child, or you're trying to draw an older character but they look not old, and you're just trying to figure out what's wrong. So that's a really common problem. And I'm just reading some of the comments. A lot of people said, can the answer be all of the above? And some people said, I do all this work. I take so much time to make the anatomy accurate, only for nothing to be seen because you put clothing on it. Haha. You know what though? You don't really need to fret about that, because you do need to know how to draw, not like super detailed anatomy, but you need to know how to draw at least forms on a body in order to put clothing on it. Okay, so if you don't know your basic anatomy and you don't know your proportions, putting clothing on it is not going to save you any more time, or like not drawing what's underneath is not going to save you any more time. Okay. A lot of people said hands, but unfortunately today I want to focus on bodies in general. And so if you have any gripes about what you struggle with the most in terms of figure drawing, let me know in the chat. Lycan Art says, members critique chat is amazing and recommended by me, even though I have to be pushed to post it all. That's great. I'm so glad you are finding value. That's why we are here. Okay, so my favorite color combination, it changes every day. It depends on what I'm working on. Okay. So I'm going to just do a little bit of drawing, and then we will talk about our submissions, because every month we have this cool challenge, which is on our Discord, and you can definitely check it out, submit your work, and be featured on one of our streams. Okay, so before we get going any further, let's just look at a male and female skeleton here. Oops. Okay, so let's start with the female skeleton. Trying to like figure out what is the best way to navigate using the navigator tool here. It's interesting because with this program there's no scroll bars, so I have to rely on the navigator tool as well as like this little like hand, the hand move tool, which I kind of like. It kind of feels more like paper to me, but anyway, let's do some annotating here, just so we can kind of understand how, the body works in terms of skeletal structure. So a lot of people think, you know, oh, I don't want to trace, or tracing is bad, and I'm not disagreeing, but I'm just I feel like, oh, how do I deselect? There we go. Okay. I feel like tracing things are important for studying, so especially things like anatomy, right? So I'm just going to draw over the skeleton here just to kind of show you the differences between females and male bodies and how our skeletons work. So this lovely photographer named Bernhard Unger, I hope I'm not butchering his name, but these images I found on Flickr, and they're really, really helpful. They're kind of like 3D renders. So if you look at female bodies and female rib cages, let's just look at the torso here, okay? So the torso consists of rib cage and pelvis, right? Rib cage and pelvis, and you can simplify them into shapes like this. So if you traced just the pelvis on the skeleton, it actually, I don't actually draw pelvises like that. I include the bone here. So like, can you see how close this is to the actual edge of her skin, right? So I kind of draw the hip boxes like that. It includes the great trochanter, which is like this joint here. So this bone juts out the most, right? In terms of all of the body, this bone here sticks out the most. And I think that that is important to note because a lot of people think the hips stick out the most, right? But generally speaking, the widest point of the pelvis is actually the top of this bone here. And that's why I draw the pelvis as a box and more like a slightly tapered box. So this would be like a perfect rectangle, but this kind of shape is how I draw the female pelvis. Okay, so male pelvises I might draw more like this, and female pelvises stick out a little bit. So if you think about like the bathroom symbol, okay, like for male and female washrooms, okay, so just think about the washroom symbol and or you know, bathroom symbol, and you kind of see this hourglass figure, right? And obviously it's very exaggerated, but you definitely see it because the just the ratio of the rib cage and the hips. Generally speaking, I would say if you filled the rib cage with sand, let's say we fill the rib cage with sand, right? And then I pour the sand into the pelvis or the pelvis area, okay? This shape here, it should be, the proportions should be 1:1, okay? So in a female body, the rib cage and the pelvis proportions are 1:1. That doesn't mean they're the same shape. It just means that they are roughly the same size, okay? So it's kind of like if I had a circle and I had a square, right? They're different shapes, but they're about the same size. So that's kind of what I mean. So some people, to avoid confusion, instead of drawing a circle and the pelvis like this, right? And they can draw it as 2 boxes. So if you draw it as 2 boxes, then the shapes are a little bit more similar, right? And it can help you better remember it. So it's up to you. If you like drawing the box, then draw a box. If you like drawing the oval, then draw the oval. Whatever is the most comfortable for you. The box comes in handy though when you're drawing like a 3/4 view, right? Because it helps you visualize where that turn is. Okay, so for example, I would draw this a little bit lower. So if you wanted to draw the box, right? That helps me visualize it a lot better. And then if I'm drawing the box from behind, right? So you can see the hips are generally a little bit wider than the rib cage. And you can actually see a little bit of the bottom of this box, right? So here you can see the bottom, here you can see the top. So boxes are really helpful when you're drawing 3/4 view stuff, or when you're drawing something that requires shading. And also some people are just more round and other people are more square, right? We're all kind of a little bit differently. We're all built a little bit differently. So you can use whatever method works for you. Okay, I'm just going to catch up with the chat here. I am going to go in. So Thana says, I wanted to join this stream because of bodies, not so much with static posing, but dynamics. Yeah, we're definitely going to go into that, but dynamic poses are like everything. First of all, most people struggle with proportions. So I'm going to go over proportions first. Okay, so in the order, we're going to go proportions and according to the poll. Proportions right. Then we're going to do dynamic poses and foreshortening. Foreshortening are technically dynamic. Foreshortened poses are dynamic, but I will talk a little bit about dynamic poses. I have a couple of them lined up. Okay, so we're not going to do timed poses today, but we are going to do dynamic. And then 3 is going to be foreshortening. Okay, so I will be talking about all those things today, just one at a time. Okay, so now we're going to talk about head size. This is all proportions, and so I wanted to start with the bones and the bone structure just to kind of show you the, you know, some landmarks. And you may think that this is a static pose, but there's actually a little bit of counterbalance in here. Like you can see that, you know, the shoulders and hips have this kind of opposing counterbalance, right? And that is actually more dynamic than just a static pose standing straight up and down. There's more weight on this leg than this leg, right? You can tell this leg is straighter. This is the weight-bearing leg. This leg is coming out a little bit more. There's a slight tilt in the shoulders and a slight tilt in the hips. So it is a lot more fluid and dynamic looking than just a straight up and down. And I also find a lot of people have trouble, you know, drawing the body in different, not just different poses, but like from the back, from the side, 3/4 view. And so I was hoping to talk about that as well. Quinn says, I have trouble refining the character. The gesture looks great, but when I go down to tie or clean it up, it doesn't look quite right. Okay, I will keep that in mind. It could just be a proportions thing as well. But I'm going to talk about some tips on how we can possibly fix that. So yeah, so keep your questions coming. Yes, somebody asked, are you going to be doing November bone submissions? Yes, I have them ready, but I just thought I would jump into some quick anatomy before I do the features. I'm just trying something a little different today. Okay. So the head size, back to the head size here. If you kind of look at the different head sizes of males versus female bodies, in terms of proportions, the female head, like I like to think of the female head as in terms of the head to rib cage ratio. The head is actually here in this image, it actually looks like it's half the size of the rib cage, but I usually draw the head a little bit bigger. This is because you're looking at a skeleton here. Okay, so there's not a lot of hair, there's nothing kind of, there's no skin on the face. It's just a skeleton, it's just a skull. But once you add some hair, you know, and then you add a lot more, you know, layers on top of the skeleton, the head size is actually becomes a lot larger. So when I draw bodies, I like to make the head about, I'd like to make the rib cage about 1.5 times the size of the head instead of 2. Okay, so you can keep that in mind. And the other thing I want you guys to take a look at is this curve here. So this curve kind of follows the curve of the spine, right? It kind of follows the back of the head, comes all the way down, and you see it curving along the spine, and then it curves out this way. Okay, so this curve, or this S curve, is really, really important because the rib cage will look a lot different depending on how you draw it. So for example, if you are drawing a body from the side, a lot of people will say, okay, I'm gonna draw in my rib cage and my hips. So from the front, let's start from the front. Let's say from the front, you kind of have this shape, right? Roughly. These are very, very simplified shapes. So from the front, a female body looks like this. And then on the side, if you think about this as like 3D shapes, right? From the side, a lot of people will be like, okay, this is the rib cage and these are the hips. Now, what's wrong with this torso? You can see that there is no S curve at all. It's just straight up and down, right? And so that's kind of the number one mistake is the stacking, right? You're stacking it wrong. The reason why your poses don't look dynamic is because of this stacking. So you want to think about counterbalance. So instead of stacking, what you want to do is you want to think of counterbalance. Okay, so counterbalance would be more of that S shape or that S curve that we're thinking about. Okay, so the neck curves out this way, right? And then the rib cage curves out this way, and then the pelvis curves that way. So this is a little bit exaggerated, but like generally speaking, it's got this kind of curve to it. And then when you put in your, then once you put in your boxes, I'll make that a little shorter. So now if I put in these boxes, right? Now I have that counterbalance, and now my figure looks a lot more fluid. Okay, so no stacking. Remember that the neck is attached at the back of the head and not in the middle. Okay, it's not like this. It's, you know, maybe in cartoons it's like that, but if you look closely at the way cartoons are drawn, it's still based off of actual human anatomy, so it's actually attached to the back. Okay, this is the biggest mistake. And then if you have this S curve, then your body looks a lot more fluid and a lot more natural and a lot more human, right? Okay, so this is the torso to head proportions are probably the most important thing to get right. And so if you think about the head, here you can kind of see if let me just take a different color here. I'm just going to shade in, let's choose a fun brush. Let's do a watercolor brush here. Okay, so if you look at the head size, and if I kind of draw that head shape into the torso, right, you can see that it's slightly smaller than like 2 heads. Okay, so it's about It's between 1.5 to 2 heads. Anime proportions, if you're drawing like stylized figures, right? Anime style figures have bigger heads. So you kind of have a range there to play with, but the smaller the rib cage, the younger the person looks. Okay. The larger the rib cage, the more masculine they look, the more heroic they look. So if I was drawing like Wonder Woman, let's move on to some silhouettes here. If I was drawing a silhouette of Wonder Woman, right? Let's see. If I was drawing a silhouette of Wonder Woman, I would probably make her pretty broad. Right? Like she's buff. She's just strong. She's a strong woman, right? Oh, this watercolor brush is very transparent. Ha ha ha. Okay, let's try oils. There we go. Okay. So she would have a much bigger torso, right? And so I would have to kind of make her hip area more balanced to kind of balance out her shape, right? So her torso might be a little bit wider, right? For example. Right? And then like you add hair or whatever. And so her torso is wider. But if you're drawing like an anime girl, right? Like an anime girl would have a bigger head and she would probably have a smaller rib cage because anime girls kind of look like kids sometimes. They kind of look like children. And then their hips are, their pelvises are a little bit shorter and typically speaking, right? So they would kind of look more like this. Right? I'm just kind of drawing a simple silhouette, very rough silhouette. Okay, so you can kind of see the differences in proportions even between females. Okay, so whether you want it to be more realistic or whether you want it to be more stylized, you do have a little bit of room there. But yeah, like some people like the aesthetic of the smaller torso. So like you can see this torso is only slightly bigger than the head, whereas over here, right, the torso is much bigger than the head. So maybe like 2 heads. But I wouldn't go more than 2 heads for female characters. Otherwise, it kind of looks more like a male character. Okay. So you're struggling with male proportions. Okay. All right, let's look at male bodies next. So let's see here. I have to make new notes here for my male skeleton. Okay. All right, so if we look at male torsos here, right, we'll do the same kind of analysis. So on male torsos, they're very different. I mean, relatively speaking, the anatomy is the same. We all have, you know, pretty much the same bones. But if you look at the size of the rib cage here, right, look at the size of the rib cage versus the size of the head compared with the female, it's a lot bigger, right? Look at the size of the shoulders. And if you look at how wide the shoulders are, they're a lot wider. And so what you can do is if you bring up the shoulder width, right, you can kind of see that there's a lot of space between the shoulders and the head, right? Like I could fit 3 heads here, right? Whereas on the female, let's look at the female. If you did the same thing with the female body, right, and you bring up the lines of the shoulders, it's a lot smaller, right? I should only be able to fit like, you know, maybe 1.5, 1 to 1.5, right? So shoulder width is a really good indicator, and also neck width. So female necks are generally less wide than male necks. Let's go back to the male figure here. Male necks tend to be pretty wide. If you take a closer look, it's like almost as wide as the head, right? And the thicker the neck, the more masculine the character looks, okay? And then if you look at the male pelvis here, right, the male pelvis is generally shorter and smaller, like much smaller than the female pelvis. Let's have a look at the female pelvis, right? If you look at the female pelvis, again, it's a lot bigger when compared with the male. So in the end, what you see here, when you're actually drawing a little silhouette, let's go back and draw like my little silhouette here. Okay, so if I was drawing male torsos, so again, these are just focusing on proportions, okay? If you were to draw Wonder Woman, show us how you would break down the body. I'm definitely going to show you how to break down the body, but we are taking baby steps here. This is a very beginner friendly tutorial. Keep your suggestions coming, but yes, I will definitely go into that. Okay. So if I was drawing Superman, okay, if I was drawing Superman, I could make the torso silhouette really huge, like bigger than 3 heads wide. Okay, just for fun. Look at that. Really wide neck. You notice that I'm using like more square shapes for the head, because male heads, especially like really masculine males, right? Like they tend to have more chiseled chins and things like that. So I'm gonna make the neck much wider, right? And even like in a silhouette, like in just a very, very simple way, you can start to make your figure look pretty realistic. Okay, so that would be sort of the torso shape, and then you can like draw in his arms. So you can see I start off with sticks and then I add mass to them. It's just easier process for me, because with sticks I can kind of keep track of how long I want everything to be, and then, you know, what the pose is, and I'm focusing on one thing at a time. Okay, so this is super buff heroic male torso. Okay, we're going to talk about the lower half a little bit later, but I want to just focus on torso sizes. Because with the male rib cage, right? The male rib cage is really 2 times the size of the head or more. Like you could probably get away with 3 times the size of the head. It depends on how tall the person is. So this person's probably about 6'3". Okay. If I had to guess, Superman would probably be like 6'4", maybe 6'3". But if I was drawing somebody like leaner, maybe I'm drawing a young adult male. Let's say he's kind of like a college student, maybe in his 20s, right? And not super buff. He doesn't work out. He's kind of nerdy, which is, you know, he doesn't really work out. He plays a lot of video games. You know, doesn't really care about muscles. You know, just your average guy. Then his body might look more like this, right? So, you know, you could still give him some shoulders and stuff, some more angular shoulders. This is kind of your your typical sort of, you know, young male body, right? So you can exaggerate it however you like, but you just want to keep in mind that the most important thing is the torso and hip ratio. Sorry, the the hip is part of the torso. Having trouble with words today. The head to torso ratio. Okay, so let's go back. So if the head is this big, right? You can kind of draw in the shapes like that versus the female, you know, the female one, the hips would be a little bit wider, right? And the torso would be, or the rib cage would be a little bit smaller. Okay, so hopefully you see those differences now, and it's a lot more obvious to you. Because this is like one of the biggest struggles, and it's actually pretty simple to solve as long as you get those shapes right and those proportions right. So if the head is 1, then the torso would probably be 2. I keep saying torso, I mean rib cage, 2 to 3 times the size of the head. And the pelvis is roughly the size of the head. So like if I filled the head with sand and I poured it into the pelvis, it's roughly the same. Okay, so male pelvises are much smaller than female pelvises. You know, they don't have uteruses, they don't have wombs, right? So it's a lot smaller, but their rib cages by comparison is a lot bigger. Okay, so if you can remember this, then you've got the basics down, and you'll set yourself up for a win. Male necks tend to be wider as well, okay? Wider than females. You can see this guy doesn't even have a neck. And sometimes there are some male characters that are so buff that their necks kind of come out this way, right? Okay. Just gonna catch up with the chat here. Zephyr says, I find the shoulder length gives the best marker for masculine and feminine body types. That's true, but like if you ever see swimmers, right? If you look at swimmers, like sometimes they have really, really wide shoulders, like even the female athletes, because they're just like using their shoulders more. So I would say yes, shoulders in terms of how strong or how muscular somebody is, but in the end, it's like the head to rib cage to pelvis proportion that is really going to give you that the correct and accurate proportions for drawing bodies. You are explaining better than my art school teacher. Thank you. I get that a lot. So I have to give my anime girls bigger hips, you say? So anime girls, we actually have a video. Iggy just made a video on how to draw anime girl body. So you can check that out. It's on our channel. And he goes into details on how anime style hips are different than realistic hips. So they're a little less tall. Okay. Silhouettes like this are fun because you get to try different compositions. Yeah, definitely. Okay, so remember those ratios, guys. Math is important for art when it comes to proportions, right? So you definitely want to remember math. They're simple proportions, right? Very, very simple. And you also want to think about volume, right? So when you're thinking about drawing people, you want to think about mass, because mass is expressed like with volume, right? And this is what makes something feel 3D. When you have mass and you're drawing volume. So that's kind of why I express it as in like you fill it with sand versus you know, versus if it's like a flat shape, it's a little bit different. Okay. So what about from the side? So, okay, so if you're drawing a male body from the side, let's start with the head. So we're just gonna do torsos, okay, for now. Just want to keep things really simple. So let's say I draw the head and I draw the neck, right? Notice how wide I made that neck. It's just an exaggeration, okay? And then I would draw in the torso kind of like this. Right, so maybe you see a little bit of that. We can make it a little bit wider. It depends on, you know, how you envision this box. Okay, so I'm gonna make it, this is the side here. This is the front. Oops, wrong tool. Okay, so this is the side. And then I'm gonna draw in his hips. So his hips are gonna be a little smaller. Remember, they're roughly the size of the head. I think I made his ribcage a little long. Okay, so you can see it still has this kind of curve to it, right? And then if I was drawing the face, I can kind of make it a little bit more cube-like too, if I wanted to. Make it more like this. You can see the top of his head. Okay, so then when I'm drawing legs, so now let's talk about legs. So legs on male and female bodies are pretty similar. Pretty similar, right? Like once you have the basic stuff done, then there's really not too big of a difference, just like how much muscle you want to put on them. So for example, let's go back to this drawing here. So he looks like he's got like super small hips, but generally speaking, the body is 7 to 8 head heights. Okay, 7 to 8 head heights, except when you're drawing heroic people. So if you're drawing, you know, here I'm just gonna make him kind of stand like this to have a little bit more balance, because he's kind of curved, right? He's got a curve to his body. So one leg is going to be weight bearing, and then the other leg is going to be more of like a prop, or have more of a dynamic shape. Okay, so I'm just kind of drawing in the foot. This is all just a silhouette. And I'm just making this up because I'm hoping that you can just see how easy it is to construct these figures using very simple shapes, right? I didn't do any anatomy. I'm just kind of drawing from the inside out, right? I'm just drawing in, blocking in my basic shapes, right? So you can see, like on the leg, the thinnest points are at the ankle as well as the knees. Okay, so when you're drawing legs, you can kind of think about them as, okay, they attach to the pelvis as in this kind of underwear shape, and then the great trochanter is here, which is like that point that is the widest on the pelvis, right? And then if you remember the skeleton, your legs are actually attached at the side and not in the middle. Okay, so if you look at, you know, those wooden mannequins that you buy at the stores, the legs are attached down here, and that's incorrect. The more anatomically correct skeletons, they attach on the side. So look for those for, you know, a good understanding of true anatomy. So once I draw in the legs, what I do is like I find the midpoint, right? I find, okay, there's my leg, and then I kind of draw a curved line like this to find the same joint on the other leg, right? Because this leg could be bent, this leg could be up here, it could be up there, right? So if I drew in a curve, then I know exactly where the knee is on a leg, even if it's turned. So let me fix this. This would go over here, right? And then you can draw in those cylinder shapes. Okay. And so like the thinnest points are really the ankles and the knees, and then the calves. The calves are a little bit bulkier on the outside of the leg and a little bit lower, right? So it kind of peaks here on the outer leg and it peaks here on the inner leg. And arms and legs are very, very similar. If you can draw arms, you can draw legs. So, okay, so going back to this figure, whoops, I would probably make his arms a little bit thicker. It's like he's missing some forearm muscle here. Okay, so now for this guy, he's kind of standing in a less dynamic pose, but I can still maybe I can move his shoulder up a little bit just to make him a little bit more dynamic. So Superman, you can see he is definitely not just 7 heads high. I was just drawing this out of my head, but if I wanted to measure him out, this would be 1 head, 2, 3, 4, whoops, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, maybe 8.5. Okay, my heads aren't all exactly the same size, but like, you know, roughly. He's roughly 8 heads. 8.5 heads. Okay. This is heroic. Heroic. So supermodels, super athletes, you know, Superman, they can have heroic proportions. Now, if I'm drawing this guy over here, he's just your average guy, right? So he would probably be 7 heads high. And so I'm gonna find this is like 7 heads here, roughly. Right? So I tend to make males 7.5 heads. So, you know, I'll put like the feet down here and just give them slight bend in the leg. Okay, so look at the size of my brush. It's pretty thick, and this is like, you know, a little sloppy and just like messy, but you can get the idea of how you can draw and exaggerate proportions using just shapes. All right. Okay, so catching up with chat here. How far apart is the rib cage to pelvis? That's a really good question. So the rib cage to pelvis is generally, I eyeball it. I would say it's like roughly the size of your fist. Or you could say like roughly the width of the neck. But like those are average because, you know, some people have bigger hands and some people have thicker necks, right? But if you, so go ahead and feel the bottom of your rib cage. So put your hand at the bottom of your rib cage right now. Okay. And feel that bottom rib. Okay. And then put your hand on your hip. Okay. You feel that distance. Okay. Is it roughly, like, could you fit a fist in there roughly? You could, right? So generally, I would say it's about the size of a fist, roughly speaking. And then, you know what? There are some other things that are roughly this size. So the shoulders. Okay, so let's say you have like your rib cage in here, your shoulders. Also roughly the size of your fist, your neck, also roughly the size of your fist. So I would say, like, if a male has, you know, more testosterone, like they're really buff, they would generally have buff hands too and buff necks, right? So I think that it's okay to sort of use a unit of measurement like a fist or a hand, even though it's not 100% accurate, like it's good enough, right? You can see like your fist is roughly, I'm putting my fist in front of my hand. I would say it's roughly half the size of my face, maybe a little bit smaller. But your hand, your open hand should be about the size of your face, right? So if your hand was closed, it would probably be, so 2 fists stacked would be the size of your face, not the size of your head, not the size of your skull. Okay. Okay, so I talked a lot about proportions. Let me know if you guys have any questions so far. And then I will move on to the dynamic drawing. 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 7.5. I generally just like the look of the 7.5 heads, and some people would argue that males are typically 8 heads high, but it really depends on, you know, who you're using as this example, right? Are you drawing somebody that's 6'4", or are you drawing somebody who's, you know, 5'10"? It depends. So the answer for a lot of these things is it depends. However, that rib cage to head to pelvis ratio is a constant, because our bones don't change, right? You could get buffer, and you could just be, you know, you would have a slightly bigger rib cage if you're 7 feet tall. Definitely, you'd have a bigger rib cage, but you would have a bigger head too, right? Okay, Quinn says my style is usually like 5 heads tall, but I've been told I have a very chunky and angular style. Yeah, 5 heads tall is like chibi. So if you're drawing like a child, children, let's see here. Let me zoom out a little bit. Let me draw like a child, just so we have everybody, and then I'm gonna move on to something else. Okay. Learning my shortcuts still. Okay. So let's now draw a child. So even if Superman was a child, he wouldn't be buff, right? Like you don't want to make children super buff, because then they just look like very, very short adults. But children, you know, children's heads are less long, right? So if I was drawing like Superman or Batman, I might stylize the head like that. But with children, their heads are more circular and a lot wider than adults. They have a pretty thin neck, and their torsos are roughly the same size as their head, right? Same size as their head. Okay. So the older, but this depends. Like the older the child is, the larger their rib cage starts to become. So if you're drawing a teen, you would want the rib cage a little bit bigger, right? Like this. If you were drawing like a 2-year-old, then the rib cage might look like that. And then the pelvis maybe would look like this, right? And then the little tiny legs. And kids have pretty chunky legs, lots of rolls, you know, so I would Make the legs a little bit chunkier. But whether you're drawing female or male children, adolescents, they have very similar body proportions. Okay. Whoops. And children have very thin arms and legs, but it also depends. Like if they're babies, then they might have some baby fat, which is really cute. Okay, so that would kind of be like a 2-year-old kid. And if I wanted to make this child a little less young, then you can just make the head size smaller. But you can see when I make the head size smaller, right, the rib cage is now too big. So now this looks like a short woman or, you know, a shorter individual and less childlike, right? So I might be able to get away with like a little bit, but probably not too much. Okay, so hopefully that explains the differences. The bones in the face from the chin to around the eyes are a little bit below, keeps growing, so it looks smaller on children, but elderly people have longer faces. Yes, absolutely. That is correct. Okay, so I just wanted to show you guys, like normally I go into a lot more detail, but I thought if you are struggling with drawing people, the best thing you can do is just draw silhouettes, because it's so easy to be able to make it up because you're not focused on muscles or shading or all the details, but you're really just focused on shapes. And shapes are what you need to work on. Shapes and forms. Shapes and forms. If you struggle with proportions, okay? Go back to your shapes. Forms I would use for legs, you know, for drawing arms and legs. I'll explain a little bit more as we get into the dynamic poses. All right. We're going to take a short break to talk about our monthly challenge and monthly. So this month, this is a creepy picture, but this is one of Jessie's illustrations. I think she did it for Halloween last year, or maybe 2 years ago. But anyway, this month's art challenge is Novembones. So I want to see your bone drawings and your skeletons. Really good excuse to study your skeletons, okay? And we're going to feature some amazing artwork that people have submitted for this month. This is by Reimagined Skies. I really like this illustration. I like the color. I like how it doesn't have a jaw, and I kind of like the, you know, the humor in it. So nice work. Studying skulls is always really, really good practice, because if you can draw bones, then you have a deeper understanding of anatomy. All right. So shout out to Quinn Emperor Jess. This looks like a horse skeleton or a horse skull, and it's a lovely little study. I think you did a really nice job capturing the shape. I love the line quality in the study. So really nice work. And the last one is by Greenifer. So Greenifer, you submitted, I thought this piece was really cool because you submitted the skeleton, but also what the creature looks like from the outside. And I thought that was really, really cool for you to actually study anatomy on your own fantasy creature, whether or not this is based off of a different skeleton. I just thought this was really, really cool, and I encourage you guys to try it for yourself. So nice work on the submissions, and remember you can submit your artwork to the monthly challenge on our Discord for a chance to be featured. So join the Discord, it's a lot of fun. You get really, really good support on there, whether it's free or paid. And yeah, our members have their own sort of lounge and critique section. But even if you join the Discord for free, there's lots of amazing people and lovely art nerds to keep you motivated, and you can share your work. All right. Let's go back, and now we are going to draw. Let me clear all of this stuff. Oops. Now we're going to draw some dynamic poses. Uh-oh. There we go. Okay. So some of the poses that I had collected for today, I really wanted to draw Jim Carrey. I'm a big Jim Carrey fan. He's just, I just like funny people. I think funny people are so smart. And I like this pose because we get to study a hand, right? And we get to study this cool pose here. Okay, so let me know in the chat which one you want me to draw, because I probably don't have time for all of them. So these are the two foreshortened poses that I chose for the stream. So if you guys are here, let me know if you want to see the runner or if you want to see Jim Carrey. Okay, if you want to see the runner, a lot of people struggle with this. I post this image in all of my figure drawing classes, and my figure drawing intensive actually started today. But there's still a chance to join because it's fully asynchronous. But anyway, I post this drawing every single time for my foreshortening module, and every single time I post it, everybody struggles with this pose. Like, it looks easy, but it's not. It's really hard. So let me know if you want to see the runner or if you want to see the hand. Okay. Jimmy for the hands or the runner. Okay. Okay. And then before we go into that, though, I have some more poses that I put in here because we can study a back pose. I'm trying to find like the most dynamic. Yeah, let's start with this one. This one doesn't have a lot of foreshortening, but it's a really good pose to study because it feels super dynamic. Okay. And so if you've never taken one of my classes before, or been to one of my streams, I like to use the GSL method. So the GSL method is a method that that I put together for my students to really help them remember the sequence in which you draw. So if you want it's really meant for drawing dynamic poses. Okay, so if you want to get better at drawing dynamic poses, whether it's animals, whether it's hands, whether it's feet, anything that moves, anything that's organic, use the GSL method. Okay, and the GSL stands for gesture. G stands for gesture, the S stands for shape, and the L stands for line. Okay, this doesn't mean that you can switch these letters around and say, I'm gonna do the LSG method or the LGS method. Like, it doesn't work. It has to start with the gesture. And this is really why a lot of poses lack that dynamic look, is because you are forgetting about the gesture. Most people do it in this sequence. Most people draw their line first, okay? And they're like, okay, so I'm gonna start drawing the pose, and I'm gonna draw, her hand is like this. Let me know if you've ever done this. You kind of start by drawing the outline, right? I'm like, okay, so she's got her hand here and her jacket, and then she's got like her leg is going out like this, and then her other leg is doing this, and then her foot. And then you're like, okay, her ear, there's her neck, there's her jacket, sleeve, other sleeve, and hair, and and you're like, I'm done! Yay! I drew this figure. It doesn't look that bad. And like, okay, like, it doesn't look bad, but it doesn't feel like it has any structure to it, okay? So most people will start with the line, and that is the biggest mistake. You don't want to draw bodies from the outside in. You want to draw bodies from the inside out. Draw from the inside out, okay? So when you draw, what you want to do is you kind of want to think about it as if you're a sculptor. So if I was sculpting this, okay, I would need to build an armature, right? I would need to like put a wire down, and I have sculpted before. So, you know, I would probably like make the wire like this and then attach another wire. Okay, visualize this with me. I would bend this wire. I would do this, right, with the wire, and then I would put more wire here. Then I would attach a wire for the arms, right? This gives your body at least something, like at least the clay is not going to break around it, right? And at least it can, you know, move properly, right? So what I just drew is kind of like a gesture, right? You are drawing from the inside out. You are drawing the armature, okay? So think about your gesture phase as if you are building a gesture. So you're building the framework. I don't want to call it framework because frames are generally square. And gestures are more fluid and more organic. But your gesture is where you really draw the action of the pose. Okay? So let's remove this. If you have drawn stuff from the inside out before, then you have been doing it the right way. Let's see, what do I want to use? What tool do I want to use for this? Maybe pastel. Okay, so I'm going to use a different color for each. So I'm going to use, let's see, I like using like an orange for my gesture. Maybe because orange is very dynamic. It just feels like a happy, dynamic, bouncy color. Okay. So let's go. So the first thing you want to do is draw a gesture. And you might think, okay, how do I draw a gesture? Like, do you use the spine? Do you use the legs? And my answer for that is whatever you see first, because you and I can draw two different gestures, but we can get the same result. Okay, so I see the gesture more kind of coming through her arm, like from the top of her hand all the way down into this foot, mostly because it's aligned, right? And so I already have some kind of alignment here, like that the arm comes out a little bit longer, and then the head and the body sort of come out this way. Right? I usually will draw an alignment for the feet, but in the gesture phase, what you really want to focus on is your movement, action. Okay, so with your gesture, you're focusing on movement, action, alignment. So what do I mean by alignment? Alignment is you see, I don't see a line there, but I draw that line so that I know where the knees are. Okay, that's alignment. There is no line that goes from the top of her fingers to the bottom of her shoe, right? But I see that alignment. Okay, and then her arm, right? Her arm is kind of also doing this, right? So I see that alignment. So like my gesture doesn't have to look very much like a body at all. It's just there to help me find my movement and my action. Her hair also has action, right? Draw anything that you see that has action and try to find elements that align so that you can help yourself, you can help your future self, right? By not worrying about this when you're trying to draw in the lines, okay? Okay, so the next phase that I see is the shape phase. And so I'm going to draw that in a different color, but you can see, like, in terms of my my gestures stage, I'm really trying to draw in the stuff that you don't see, but is really important to the movement. Okay, so for shape, I'm going to use this color. Okay, so the next thing I'm going to do is start to put in my shapes. Okay, so here, this is a very difficult pose. So what you can do, and a lot of people find that starting with the head really helpful. So if you want to start with the head, you can go ahead. No pun intended. Go ahead. I crack myself up sometimes. Okay, so here's my head. You can see the bottom. Can you guys see the bottom of her chin? And you can see this triangular shape, right? That's really important to put in. But the shape phase, I'm really just focused on drawing shapes, right? And focused on figuring out where a lot of those landmarks are. So, for example, her shoulder. You know, how far is her shoulder from her ear? Right? And then usually I don't draw the shoulders first, but because her rib cage is so like bent forward, I find that drawing the shoulder can help me with the rib cage, right? Okay, so I can sketch out the rib cage. Sometimes it's also easier to draw the rib cage as if you were drawing a cylinder. Right? Especially if you have trouble with the perspective, right? You can just draw a simple cylinder. Okay, so shapes can also be forms. What I mean by that is, like, if you're in the shape phase, you can also draw forms. It doesn't have to be 2D, it can be 3D. If you can draw the torso in 3D, it's actually better. Quinn says, hey Faye, is there any way you can send all these references at the end of the stream so we can try them ourselves? Yeah, sure, I can do that. I'll put them on the Discord. Okay. So now I'm trying to figure out, now I have like these guidelines to help me keep the movement on track, right? So now I'm going to focus on getting my proportions right with the shape. So in the shape phase, here, I'm going to put my notes here. So in the shape phase, what you are focused on is proportions. Okay, so we talked about proportions for like an hour And now I want to explain how proportions relate to your overall pose in terms of how dynamic you want your pose to be. Okay, so if you're struggling with dynamic poses, you are not drawing the gesture. If you struggle with proportions, you're not putting as much emphasis on your shapes as you should. So, you know, each each stage in the GSL method is designed to help you focus on one thing at a time. So it's not super overwhelming. Okay? Okay, so the next thing I'm going to do is draw in the cylinders of the legs. And you can see I've already noticed that my gesture is a little off, right? Her legs feel really long and they shouldn't be this long. So that's okay because I wasn't focused on proportions in the gesture phase. I was focused on movement. And the other thing when you are drawing shapes, let me just move this to opposite. I locked my palette, so it's like kind of a pain to drag everything down one by one, but okay. So what I wanted you to see here is when you're drawing shapes, right? When you're in the shape phase, you want to look for negative shapes, okay? So I just drew in the negative shape between her legs and I can already see that my drawing is off, right? I can already see that I should have made her overall, just like everything that I drew should have been a little bit bigger, and that my shape layer is actually too small. So let's change that. So I'm going to make this a little bit bigger so that the legs actually lined up to the plan, right? And now I'm going to try to get my negative shape right. Okay, so what you really want to look for are your negative shapes. So she's wearing baggy jeans, right? So keep in mind that the shape is going to be a little bit larger. But like generally speaking, it's a good way of measuring your proportions, okay? Negative space is one of those things that is really, really like overlooked. People don't think about negative space at all. And space, if you're a nerd like me, you would know that space is one of your elements of art, one of your 7 elements of art, the building blocks of art. We don't think about it because space is like, you're like, wait, space is a building block? Yes, it is. It's one of the elements of art, and it's one of the ones that we don't think about. We think about line, we think about color, we think about value, but we really don't think enough about negative space. And negative space is really important because it helps you with your proportions. Okay, so what I might do here is I might draw the hand first because I kind of know where the hand is, right, in relation to everything else. My hand is roughly there. I just kind of draw it as an oval shape for now, and then I would connect my shoulder to my hand and then find the halfway point, okay? especially if you're drawing a figure that has like bulky clothing and it's really hard to see what's underneath. It's kind of how you figure it out. Draw what you can see and then use your logic to figure out what's going on. Lotus, you are in art class. It's just like a free art class. Okay, so there we go. So that's kind of how I would draw in the shapes, right? And I'm taking my time here. Usually I would probably spend about 30 seconds on the gesture, if that, and roughly like 2 minutes on the shape. And then 1 or 2 minutes on the shape, and then for the line art would probably take the longest, but the line art should be really easy and satisfying if you have everything else right. Okay, so some other negative space you can consider. There is a triangle here, right? If you're drawing stuff and your proportions don't look right, then it's probably because you didn't really look for your negative shapes. So I'm gonna draw in that triangle, right? And then I could say, okay, so my arm is roughly, again, my shoulders are here. And sometimes when I'm drawing from like timed references, I'll just draw a silhouette. Like I'll color the entire thing in, just kind of like how I drew Superman. Okay, so there's my shape. And then the last phase is your line art. So I'm going to choose like a nice Renaissance brown color for my line art. And I'll probably stick with this brush. I haven't really experimented with a lot of brushes yet in this program. But you can see that like once you have your gestures and your shapes, the line is so easy, right? When you are drawing your line art, like really what you're focusing on are the details. So treat this as a reward. But a couple of things that you want to think about when you're working on the line art is you want to think about overlaps. Okay, overlaps will help you draw more descriptive forms with only lines. And I'll kind of show you what I mean. So if I was drawing a figure that's clothed, right? This figure is, well, half clothed. But you can see like she's wearing clothing that's pretty baggy, but her clothing, like her jeans, interact with her with her body and will wrap around certain forms, right? So I still draw in the body without the clothes on as my shape underneath. Okay, but you can include some things like if I wanted to draw in, you know, this triangle shape, yes, technically that's a shape layer, but I find it more helpful to actually draw in the body. Let's try my square fountain pen. So then when it comes to, you know, drawing in your lines, you have a lot more freedom to, you know, focus on the really nice details. And you don't even have to draw lines, right? If you're like a cartoonist, or, you know, if you really like using line art, then sure, right? Draw your lines. But like, you don't even have to draw lines. You can go straight into values and shading from here. So one thing that you can see here is, can you see this landmark right here? Right here. That's her hip bone. You'll notice that her pants are below that landmark. And even though her pants are baggy, right? There's always going to be one leg that is looser than the other. So in terms of how the fabric interacts with it. So for example, there's a lot of bunching kind of going around this leg, which means it's wrapped around this leg pretty tightly. And then here, it's much looser, right? It's much looser on one side. I really don't like this pen a lot, but I've already started, so I'm just going to stick with it. So you can see it's different on this leg. On this leg, her jeans are clinging to the top and looser on the bottom. But you can see how, you know, having the cylinders and having those shapes in really helps me draw the clothing. So this is, I'm gonna keep the line art pretty rough because I don't think any of you guys struggle as much with line art than you do with proportions, right? But I just wanted to show you like the full breakdown of the GSL method in case you haven't watched one of our videos. I've made a lot of videos on the GSL method. And if you take my figure drawing class, this is kind of how I teach. And you can apply this to any drawing, whether it's foreshortened, whether it's you know, just one body part, like hands. It works great for hands as well. I think we also have a playlist on the GSL method, so you can just Google or search winged canvas GSL and you will find our playlist. Okay. I don't know why I decided to like make her glove really dark, but I kind of liked the contrast of it. But Joanne, who won the poll there? I didn't actually make up a poll. It was just kind of, I asked people whether or not they want to see me draw Jim Carrey or if they want to see me draw the runner. But I can't tell. It was pretty even. So I'm surprised a lot of people didn't actually put in shading. The runner? Okay, I'll draw the runner. Jimmy? Okay, so I'm kind of getting a little bit too lost in the details there. But yeah, this is basically how I would approach all of these different steps. So, you know, if I reduce the opacity of the other layers, then you can start to see that the final ink drawing is based on everything else. It feels a lot more dynamic because of what's underneath, right? Because I set myself up for it, and I wasn't lazy and just kind of skipped to the line. So, you know, for the person, if you're there, I saw your comment on on our YouTube poll about like, oh my gosh, I spent all this effort drawing the figure only for it to be covered up with clothing. My response to that is your effort is not wasted. Any effort that you put into drawing what's underneath is going to help you make your drawing even better. So it definitely is not wasted effort, and don't think like that, because one of the challenges that I ask my students to do is I ask them to draw like a fully clothed figure, someone wearing like really baggy clothing, and draw them without clothing, like just to draw their forms and to figure it out, right? That's one of the hardest things to do, but it is essential if you want to get really, really good at figure drawing. Okay. Okay, so let's see how much time we have. We have about 25 minutes. That's a good amount of time for the foreshortening. So let's now move on to how to draw foreshortening. Okay, let me turn off all these layers here. I'm going to create some more layers for my gesture, shape, and line. And turn that off. Turn that off. Turn that off. Here we go. Runner. Thank you, Joe. There's a clear winner here. People want to see the runner. This is a really, really hard pose. And the reason why foreshortening is hard is because our brains are wired in such a way where we look at this and we're like, there's nothing wrong with this pose. I'm looking up at somebody. We have conditioned ourselves over time to recognize foreshortening and adjust it in our brains. So it's really funny because whenever I challenge my students to draw this, and let me just kind of show you how I would have drawn this when I was before I actually learned how to draw people properly. Let's see here. Let's do base. Okay. So most people, when they draw something like this, they'll be like, okay, I see a head. Oh, let me find a better pencil here. Okay, I see her head. Her head there. She's got this ponytail. Okay. Okay, so this is what you shouldn't do. Okay, so don't follow me here unless it's for jokes. But okay, so there's her head, and then I see her body, and she's kind of wearing something like this, and then her arm. How many of you guys? Let me know in the chat. How many of you guys start drawing people from the head and work your way down? Like this. This is exactly how I would draw if. You know, maybe when I was like just learning. I started learning art really young. But when I was a teen, I would draw like a lot of, you know, celebrities. And so I would draw something like this. Right, so here's the leg, and here's the thing, and then I would draw the foot like that. So actually, that's not that bad. But even this is better than outlining. Okay, so the first one I did where I just kind of started and started outlining stuff, right? That's the worst that you could do. At least when you start from the head and then you draw everything else, everything is kind of overlapped, right? And it gets bigger and bigger as you move down. And that kind of makes sense, right? But the problem with drawing starting from the head is that you're missing the gesture. You are missing the alignments. And it's not the best way. It's better than outlining, right? Constructing is always better than outlining. But starting with the head is what most people do, and sometimes it's good to start with the head, right? If the pose calls for it. So for example, if I was drawing a very dynamic pose where, you know, I'm drawing like a person and she's kind of looking down and then her body is like a lot smaller, right? Like let's say her body and her legs are like here, right? And like her hand is here. Okay, then it makes sense for me to start with the head. If her head is the biggest, right? If the head is huge, then yes, it makes sense to start with the head. It's the largest shape, right? So sometimes it makes sense, but in this case, it actually doesn't make sense. I would actually start with her hips, her pelvis, because that's the biggest shape. And you can see where it starts to turn, right? You can see like where I kind of drew the bottom plane. You can see that in the shadows, right? My cursor's on it. It's hard to see, but like you can actually see that. You can see the bottom plane of her pelvis, okay? So don't draw it like this. Let's start again. I'm gonna keep that arrow because it's actually kind of cool looking. All right, so let's start with the GSL method, okay? So if I was drawing something that's foreshortened, I would probably start to draw like an outer shape, right? Only because I don't want my brain to correct the proportions, right? So I'm kind of drawing in just like an overall shape that I want to contain her in, right? And then normally the hips, so her gesture might be like this. Okay. Her back arm is kind of like this, and then like this. Okay. So next, what I want to draw in is her pelvis, and I want to draw in like if I looked at her right now, put in another layer here. So I'm going to annotate this. Look at where the top of her pelvis is, right? And look at the top and bottom of that container shape that you drew in, okay? It's probably 1/4 of the way down, right? Even more than 1/4. Holy smokes, it's like less than 1/4, right? Less than 1/4. And that's like mind-boggling, because if you were drawing a person standing straight, right, their pelvis would be like at least kind of somewhere halfway, right? So I find that it's really, really helpful if you draw in these lines and kind of help yourself measure it out to maintain the foreshortened look. Otherwise, it tends to all fall apart. So if this is the top and this is the bottom, then I'm gonna find halfway. Okay, so halfway is kind of like here. And so half of that would be a quarter, and I'm going to go even less than a quarter. Okay. The top of her shorts are all the way up here. And like her entire torso is condensed in 1/4 of the top part. Okay. All right. So, if I had to say where halfway would be, I would say it's probably about her, like the inside of her knee, right? So the back of her, of her leg. And so you really need to measure stuff out in order for it to be a successful foreshortening drawing, especially in difficult poses like this. So this would be like, yeah, this would be halfway. Okay. All right, let me go back. Quinn, I find my references, where do I find my references? On Google, on Pinterest. I find that now also the internet is flooded with AI generated images, which makes me really ticked off because they're not good references. Hopefully it gets better, but they're pretty bad. Especially for faces and anatomy, it just looks so bad. And it's also mostly junk on there. Soon we won't even be able to tell it apart, and that is going to be very frustrating. Okay. Luckily, though, most of them declare that they're AI, so it's easy to avoid those. Okay. So the next thing is, if you look at where the knee is, and actually I apologize, I shouldn't have drawn this in orange because this is now my shape layer. So let me redraw that. I should still be focusing on my gesture. So if I want to play around with alignment, here, and then where the arms or the hands align, I would say roughly about that. Okay, so next. Now I will draw in my pelvis. Okay, so this should be the biggest shape. Why did it turn into a blending brush? What did I do? What did I do here? Okay, so there's my largest shape. And then the rib cage in this case would probably be about half of that stacked on top. And then the head would be even smaller, stacked on top, kind of like a snowman. This arm is actually pretty long, which I think I made my pelvis a little bit too long. We'll see. Can always adjust. And you can see I had to foreshorten my shape as well. Or sorry, I had to foreshorten the form of the pelvis, like that box, right? You can see it's like going into perspective by a lot. And I kind of had to do that, otherwise it wouldn't be pushed enough. And then if this is halfway, then I kind of misjudged my proportions. Okay, so there's a running shoe. This would come out to about there. And then her shoe is actually sitting halfway on the inside of her knee. It's kind of like this. So yeah, I am using a new program today. I'm trying out Rebel. I used Photoshop when I first learned digital art, probably over 20 years ago. And I think I used Photoshop 3. Might have been Photoshop 3. It was like very, very early beginnings of Photoshop. That's kind of like what everybody used, so we really didn't have a choice. Like there wasn't, unless you wanted to use MS Paint, there wasn't really anything else or any other alternatives. And then after that, I didn't do digital for a while. I always used digital art as part of my traditional, or as part of my process. Like I would use it for things like compositions. I would do a lot of photo bashing just for fun. And I did a lot of vector illustrations using Illustrator, but I didn't really, like I wouldn't call myself like a digital artist. I'm more of a mixed media type of girl. But anyway, after Photoshop, I think I started using Medibang mostly to teach classes because it was free. And if you've never done digital art before, Medibang's a really simple software that you could try, and we made tutorials on our channel to help people learn and digital art for free. So I used a lot of Medibang. It did like mostly what Photoshop did, like the stuff that I used it for, except it wasn't very good with it was very basic. It wasn't very good at adjustments and things like that, adjusting layers. And then I used Krita, which I still like Krita, and come on, like what's not to like? It's free. Krita's free, and not to mention it does animation, which is super cool. But I didn't really like the standard shortcuts on Krita. I find them to be really hard to learn, like not very intuitive. So I found that the learning curve on Krita was a lot more challenging. And so when I picked up Rebel, I was afraid that it would be a big learning curve. And I'm not really, like today I'm just kind of playing around with it. I'm just using it to learn it, but I'm not really doing it justice here because I'm not using a lot of like the really cool effects, like the metallics that you could do with it, or you can actually tilt your paper and make drips, which is so cool. But I will learn it first, and then maybe I'll do a stream where I paint with it. you can see I didn't even draw any of the muscles, right, in my previous layers, because you don't really need to. If you have your cylinders set up correctly, then you can just kind of wing it, you know, if you know the basics. So legs are generally harder to draw because they, you know, they have all these muscles that are asymmetrical. So I'm not going to go into too much details about anatomy because most people struggle with foreshortening and proportions. So I wanted to focus on that more. I can go into more detail in an anatomy stream, and I think Jessie, actually this month we have a lot of anatomy streams that we have planned. Jessie's gonna go into detail with like skeletal structure and stuff like that, so you don't want to miss those. And if you didn't know, Jo, our mod, designs all of our thumbnails, people. She's very, very talented. So shout out to you, Jo. Getting people to click on our videos. So somebody asked if Rebel is free. It is not free, but it's they go on sale. If you join our server, we are you know, we are affiliates with them. So if you purchase through our affiliate link, then you can help support the channel and not pay anything extra. And if you're interested, you can click the link in our description. I think I've linked the software and where to get it. I don't think I made the arm high enough, but so I'm going to adjust it. So again, typically when I draw figures, I don't really draw line. I don't really do line art. I do more of like, I draw some tones and then I'll draw lines on top. But for the purposes of this demonstration, I'm just drawing lines. I like her messy ponytail. It's very dynamic. What is going on with her hand? Every time my students are like, Faye, why did you do this to me? Why did you give me a hand that looks like this? Like, why? I'm like, I'm sorry. It's not the hand. Don't worry about the hand. Don't draw it. Let's see, I'm gonna try and move this over. Okay, let's do this hand. I kind of wish it was the Jim Carrey hand, but it's this weird, really weird looking hand. So if you have trouble drawing hands, especially like hands like this, I think the best thing to do is, like, you already see I have the basic size of the hand mapped out, right? And then what I think is the easiest way, at least for me, is I like to draw a mitten, and then modify the mitten. Okay, so because there's some negative space between the fingers, I kind of just drew it, but usually speaking, I would fit them all into a mitten and then work on dividing out the fingers. It actually looked better without the finger divisions. You know, like with that, I know what the hand is doing. Okay. Yeah, just draw some comic speed lines and call it a night. Yep. That's good advice. For those of you guys who are interested in shading, if you want to see me draw like a complete figure with all the values and all that stuff, let me know. Like, put like a yes in the chat if that's what you want to see me draw next time, because this time I was really hoping to give you guys like just a simple lesson on what you can do to make your proportions better. I'm not sure how many of you guys are actually interested in like realistic rendering of like bodies and such, because it takes a while. It's a little bit more dense. Yeah, shading. Okay, but you guys didn't vote for shading. Here's the poll again. Like, shading was in last place. I even voted for shading because I was like, okay, I haven't done a stream yet on shading, but you guys voted on proportions. It's always proportions, right? And like, it's probably like back to the most basic thing. So I will do a shading and realism one next time. If you guys were if you guys did vote for the shading and realism. And if you were drawing along with me, I would love to see your drawings. Share them with us on our Discord. Let's see here. Where are my social media icons? Ooh. Share them with us on our Discord. Joe's gonna put it in the link. She already in the comments. Oh, actually, Vin, thank you. Share them with, we're just at Wing Canvas on Instagram, on Discord, on Facebook. We're probably the most active on Discord, so that's where you'll find our biggest and most active community. Not the biggest, but the most active, and the most helpful. So again, thank you so much to our sponsor for this stream, XP Pen. You have an awesome selection of digital art tablets for both beginners and advanced artists, and they're ultra affordable and reliable. So I've had my tablet. I have the XP Pen 15.6 Pro, Artist Pro, and I've had it for probably 5 years or 6 years. And it's great. I don't have any problems with it. I've used all kinds of software using it. So yeah, check them out. And there's a link to one of their tablets in the description of the video as well. And also want to thank our incredible patrons and YouTube members who support us in making free arts education. So consider joining the Patreon and help us make more helpful content to make art education truly free and good quality art education, because there's a lot of stuff out there and it's hard to find the good stuff, right? If you join our Patreon or YouTube, you get really cool perks, like you get to chat with our members and our instructors, and you get asynchronous critiques as well as weekly live critiques for certain tiers. You also get to see our videos before they're released, sometimes our first cuts, which are pretty messy with all the behind the scenes stuff. And you get monthly class recordings if you are in the VIP tier and above. And so you can actually take our recorded learning classes with that. So we do have a lot of fans in different time zones. And so we introduced a new way of learning, which is recorded learning. So if you can't attend the class live, then you can watch the recording and you can get instructor feedback. So I do drawovers on most of my student artwork that need it. Some of our instructors do recorded feedback. So really, really helpful to help you grow. And if you are a member, let me move this over here, and you want to attend our live critiques, these are when our instructors have their office hours. So if they are not doing live, they generally pop in and answer questions and give a critique on submitted artwork. And so there are 4 of us, but also Arunya, who doesn't stream, is our education planner, and she's behind the scenes doing all of the hard work on the curriculum and managing the programs. So shout out to Arunya, who is not on here. Whoops, I just made myself disappear. All right. And our mission at Wing Canvas is to make art education easily accessible to everyone. And if you want to check out our programs and the other cool stuff that we have to offer, you can hop onto our website. We're just at wingcanvas.com. We are an online school of illustration, not just a YouTube channel, but we do stream live every weekend, Saturday and Sunday at 3 p.m. Eastern time. Keep an eye out for our 2025 live stream schedule. You can get it if you sign up for our email list, and you can do that on our website. So thanks again, guys, for joining the stream. I hope you had fun. I hope you learned something. I'm looking at this drawing now and I'm like, oh my goodness, I made her arm too big. So let me fix that. Uh-oh, did I draw this on oh no, I drew her hand on a separate layer. Hey. Oh, there we go. All right. First, I have to fix this layer problem. And then, there we go. Now let me fix this arm. There we go. That's a little bit better. All right, guys, take care. Have a great weekend and join Iggy's stream tomorrow at the same time. And I will see you in the next one. Bye-bye.